Hi everyone, this is Marc Bates, and this is moving on with our Bible studies. So now, there is an important date coming up on the calendar in 2025. It's going to be September 23rd. That's the Feast of Trumpets. And it's important because something happened on that date that I think we need to be well aware of. And let's talk about that, right? So the question is, when was Jesus actually born? Every December, billions of Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus, Yeshua, on the 25th of December. The date feels sacred, settled, woven into 2 millennia of tradition. But what if it's wrong? The historical evidence suggests Jesus was born months earlier, like in September of 3 BC. Multiple lines of investigation point to the same conclusion. The traditional Christmas date emerged from theological calculation and historical record. This matters more than you might think. The foundation crumbles on December 25th. The date traces back to early Christian writers like Hippolytus and Clement of Alexandria. They didn't base their calculations on eyewitness accounts or historical documents. Instead, they worked backward from a theological assumption. Early Christians believed prophets died on the same date as their conception or birth. This is actually an older Jewish assumption, Second Temple period Jewish item as well. They placed Jesus' death on March 25th, the spring equinox, right? Symbolizing new creation. And 9 months for gestation, and you reach December 25th. Elegant theology. It's very questionable history. The early church didn't even celebrate Jesus' birth for the first 3 centuries. When they finally did, the date came from calculation, not tradition passed down from those who were there. Dating Herod properly, though, changes everything. The Gospel of Matthew provides a crucial historical anchor. Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great. This creates an immediate problem for traditional dating. Herod died in 4 BC, according to the long-standing scholarly consensus. If Jesus was born during Herod's reign, he must have been born before 4 BC, but recent scholarship does challenge even this timeline. Revisionist historians point to compelling evidence that Herod actually died in 1 BC, not 4 BC. The lunar eclipse data strongly favors the later date. Josephus recorded a lunar eclipse shortly before Herod's death. Traditional scholars identify this as the partial eclipse of March 13, 4 BC, but that timing doesn't work. Josephus describes numerous activities Herod performed after the eclipse and before his death. These events require at least 54 to 62 days to unfold. The 4th BC eclipse only left 29 days before Passover. The total lunar eclipse of January 10th, 1 BC fits perfectly. It was dramatic, visible, and left 92 days before Passover for all of Josephus' recorded events. This revision opened space for Jesus to be born in 3 BC. The sky also tells a very compelling story. September 11th, 3 BC marked the beginning of something extraordinary in the heavens. On that date, Jupiter entered into conjunction with Regulus with the constellation Leo. Jupiter, known as the king planet, Regulus called the king's star, and Leo symbolizing the tribe of Judah. The astronomical event was unprecedented. Jupiter began a retrograde dance around Regulus, creating what ancient observers would have interpreted as a celestial coronation. Over the following months, Jupiter approached Regulus 3 separate times. The planet of kings danced out a halo above the star of kings. Eastern Magi, skilled in astronomy and familiar with Jewish messianic expectations, would have recognized this as announcing the birth of a great king. but the astronomical alignment goes deeper. September 11th, 3 BC also corresponds precisely to the imagery in Revelation 12. The passage describes a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars. When you map this description onto the sky of that date, everything aligns. The sun sits mid-body in Virgo, the woman. The new moon rests at Virgo's feet. The 12 stars of Leo crown the scene above. The astronomical precision is remarkable. John's vision matches the sky configuration exactly. Which brings us to the question, was John having a vision of something future, which some people think, or was he telling us the date when Yeshua, Christ, Jesus was born? I lean towards he was telling us when Christ was born. Okay? And this is not astronomy, right? In the sense of trying to foretell the future. This was astronomical vision. I'm sorry. This was not. This was astronomy, right? Which was looking at the stars to see what was happening, but not foretelling the future, right? So this is not astrology. This is astronomy. Excuse me for getting that little mix up there. Okay, cultural context confirms. September 11th, 3 BC wasn't just astronomically significant. It fell on Tishri 1 in the Jewish calendar, right? Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, better though, biblically is known as the Feast of Trumpets. This festival traditionally marked the inauguration of kings in ancient Israel, the day when the shofar sounded 100 times to herald new beginnings. The cultural timing makes perfect sense for the birth of the Messiah, the ultimate king of Israel. Other biblical details support a non-winter birth. Luke mentions shepherds watching their flocks in the fields at night. And that's the verse I have up here, right? Talking about the shepherds out in the field. Okay? Palestinian shepherds didn't keep sheep outdoors during cold December nights. That they would have been in the fields during warmer months, fattening the flocks for winter. The convergence of evidence points consistently away from December toward early autumn. So we have tradition versus truth. This raises uncomfortable questions about the relationship between cherished traditions and historical accuracy. December 25th carries deep meaning for billions of Christians. The date has shaped liturgical calendars, family traditions, and cultural celebrations for nearly 2 millennia. Does historical accuracy matter if the tradition serves its spiritual purpose? The answer will depend on how rigidly we tie the tradition to historical claims. When traditions become inflexible assertions of fact, they risk becoming idols that overshadow the truth they're meant to convey. Right? And I would point to what types of things are we doing on December 25th, especially in America. We're throwing big parties, we're giving gifts, right? And I mean, what does that have to do with celebrating the birth of Christ? Right? Giving gifts especially to our children and stuff like that. It's a great cultural holiday. Do you know that December 25th is a major cultural holiday in Japan? The Asian country that probably has the least amount of Christians as a percentage of the population. They just love it because it's a great day to give gifts to everybody, right? My mother was Japanese. She wasn't a Christian until late in her life, but she celebrated Christmas every year, right? And in typical Japanese fashion, she would send out Christmas cards to everybody, and she would keep a list of everybody who sent her a Christmas card. And if you didn't send her a Christmas card for 3 years in a row, she stopped sending you one because there was a cultural requirement to send out Christmas cards. It was not about celebrating Jesus' birth, right? It was about doing Christmas in Japanese fashion. So, you gotta wonder about this stuff, right? A healthy approach recognizes December 25th as a meaningful theological symbol while remaining open to the historical evidence about the actual birth date. Right? I'm not trying to take away your Christmas, December 25th Christmas, for you and your family. What I'm trying to say is, let's be real about what the date's supposed to symbolize, and let's get back to God's actual calendar and make sure that we recognize that the Feast of Trumpets, which is 1st of Tishri in 2025, occurring on this September 23rd, is a date we should be celebrating as well, right? Because that would have been the actual date that Christ was born. Okay, so this investigation into Jesus' birth date demonstrates the power of interdisciplinary methodology. Historical documents provide one lens. Astronomical data offers another. Cultural context adds depth. Textual analysis reveals patterns. No single discipline tells the complete story. But when multiple lines of evidence converge, they create compelling cases for reconsideration. This approach applies beyond questions of dating. Biblical scholarship benefits when historians, archaeologists, astronomers, and textual critics collaborate rather than working in isolation. The methodology also models intellectual humility. Evidence can challenge long-held assumptions. Traditions deserve respect, but they shouldn't be immune from scholarly investigation. Faith and reason can coexist productively. Historical inquiry enriches understanding rather than ancient chronology, or rather than undermining belief. The bigger picture. The September 3rd BC theory for Jesus' birth represents more than academic curiosity about ancient chronology. It illustrates how cultural practices often supersede historical precision in religious traditions. Commemorative dates frequently serve symbolic rather than literal purposes. This pattern appears throughout Christian history. Easter's dating system, the liturgical calendar, even the structure of the biblical canon reflect theological considerations alongside historical factors. Understanding these dynamics helps believers navigate the tension between tradition and scholarship with greater wisdom. We can honor inherited practices while remaining open to new evidence. We can celebrate meaningful traditions while acknowledging their symbolic rather than strictly historical nature. The goal isn't to destroy cherished customs, but to hold them with appropriate perspective. So what this means, if Jesus was born on September 3rd, September 11th, 3 BC, it changes how we understand the Nativity story. Picture a warm evening in central Israel. A teenage Jewish girl goes into labor among farm animals. Hold on a second. Let's talk about that for a second. There's no room in the inn. Well, first of all, there really weren't inns at the time of Christ, right? People didn't stay in inns. So why is the story of a manger important to help us date this? Okay? Well, what's happening in the fall festivals? We have Feast of Trumpets. Then, right, which is the coming king. It's followed very closely, 10 days, by Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Then, Sukkot, or booths, right? Well, Feast of Trumpets, the announcement of the king. Day of Atonement is when Israel's sins are forgiven by God. King, Christ, right? Being born. Day of Atonement, Christ coming into the world to take away, to carry the sins, right? And then the last feast in the fall is booths, right? Where every Israeli would build a sukkah where they can be outside celebrating for 8 days that God lives with us. The King is tabernacling with us, right? The term sukkah in Greek is tabernacle. Oh, and remember, we had the whole discussion about Eden being a metaphor for the tabernacle where God communes with us. Now it all starts to come together, right? And in Israel, it was very common in the time of Christ to build your sukkah early to make sure it was done properly. You'd be building it, you'd be putting the roof up on it. It takes time to build these things. These are temporary structures, but they had to have some permanence to them, right? They had to be able to withstand the wind and stuff. And guess what? When visitors would come, where would you put them? If you had your house, right, there, you would put them in your house, potentially, right? You'd share rooms. If you ran out of rooms, a lot of the houses in Israel had the living quarters on the top, and they would have animals at the bottom, right? Warming the house in the winter, right? Because the animals had heat, and you would have feeding troughs there. But guess what else you would have? You would have the sukkah built as well. And one of the things you do is you'd have a feeding trough there for the animals so that you could keep them there as well, especially if you were running out of room in the downstairs of your house. So it all makes sense now. Where did Joseph and Mary stay? Well, they either stayed below the house, if the relatives' houses were big enough to have a first floor where they kept the animals, where you would have feeding troughs, or if the house wasn't big enough to have one of those, right, you would have the sukkah available where they could stay, and you would typically have a feeding trough in the sukkah as well for animals, because that'd be a convenient place to keep the animals at night. So, especially when it wasn't the Feast of Booths going on. It all starts to make sense. It all adds up. I'm not taking away your Christmas. I'm just saying, let's make sure we understand this stuff in perspective properly, right? Okay. So, we've got this warm evening, right? The teenage girl goes into labor, and somewhere in the village, a shofar sounds to herald the Jewish New Year, Feast of Trumpets. Above, Jupiter crowns Regulus in a celestial dance. The Eastern astronomers interpret as announcing a new king. They head over. It takes days or years or months for them to come, right? They know that it's being happened, but they're going to come and pay homage to Jesus later. He's not on the day of his birth, right? They didn't show up on the day of his birth. Look at the gospel stories talking about the Magi coming. Okay, we'll talk about the Magi later. There's a whole lot of stuff about the Magi that doesn't make sense unless you understand the history there. Okay? Multiple disciplines point toward the same conclusion through independent investigation. This doesn't diminish Christmas celebrations in December. Traditions can carry meaning beyond their historical accuracy, but it does suggest that the actual historical event occurred months earlier during Judaism's most significant festival season, announced by unprecedented signs in the heavens, right? And this ties Jesus' birth to Revelation, which ties his return back to earth, right, to rebuild the new heaven and the new earth. It all fits together, right? So, whether we celebrate in December or September, the central truths remain. God became flesh and dwelt among us, tabernacled with us, right? The date matters less than the fact. So this is a great way for people who want to poo-poo December 25th, say that's fine, you can poo-poo it. It's just a tradition. We like celebrating this tradition. The actual date was September 11th, 3 BC. I'm sorry, September 11th, 3 BC, because it fulfilled the Jewish festival of trumpets, and fulfilled Yom Kippur, and it fulfilled Sukkot. okay? And the building of sukkahs, right? It all ties together. And once again, whether you're witnessing to a skeptic, witnessing to somebody who's never heard of the Jewish holidays, you're witnessing to a Jew, or you're witnessing to a Muslim, these details shatter any myth that they're trying to portray that Christianity is not based on the truth. Hope you enjoyed that. If you have questions, leave me a note in the comments. We're building a community here. I'm trying to give you teachings to help explore and expand your horizons. And I hope you're enjoying it. If there's something that's bothering you, somebody told you something in the Bible, or somebody told you this is a contradictory information in the Bible, let me know. I love handling those types of things. I am an apologist by training. Okay? Let me know, and we'll carry those things in. You'll catch a lot of this, but I've got years and years and years of stuff that if you don't give me some idea what you're looking for to put up early, I'm just going to follow my normal path, and we're going to spend a long time going through this stuff, Lord willing, unless Jesus comes earlier. And depending upon how you want to view it, we know pretty positively, I'm not going to die on my sword on this one, right? But I'm pretty positive that September 11th, 3 BC was the date of Christ's birth. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say, yeah, that's more than likely the date. So it's a great date for us to hold especially if you're a Messianic like I am, where Feast of Trumpets is a big day for us. If you're not a Messianic, it's still one of God's ordained feasts. Christians should be looking into these feasts and celebrating them as well, because they foretell everything that Christ did. Right? You want to relish in the joy of Yeshua, Jesus Christ, whatever name you want to use for him, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, doesn't matter. You want to relish in those things. God put in 7 very specific dates for that, right? And there's an 8th one that was added later on, Hanukkah. It's not a biblical feast, but it is a very Second Temple feast, and there's a lot of significance for that as well, which we will talk about as well at some point. Let me know what you're looking for. Put it in the comments, and please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends. I would appreciate that greatly. Thank you very much. Have a great day.